All right, our topic today, did a good God make bad things? A disclaimer, we're not going to get through everything. It's just impossible in the time that we have. The reason being there's a lot of bad things out there, and to deal with each one individually is just impossible with our limited time this afternoon. But we're going to deal with two things in particular. One deadly bite, we will deal with the issue of venom, and the poison in me, we will deal with the issue of poison. And why did God create some creatures that appear to be brilliant killers, that appear to be designed to kill, designed to inflict pain? How does that fit in with a very good world? So, one deadly bite. Let's dive into it. My academic background, by the way, is in geology. My natural science degree is in earth science. I specialized in paleobiology, which is sort of studying fossils and reconstructing ecosystems and the like. So why on earth am I here speaking to you about animals? Well, I absolutely love snakes, and we get a varied reaction when I give this talk because it's quite interesting. People in the UK, I've noticed, generally speaking, snakes. They don't like talking about snakes. They don't like thinking about snakes. When really in the UK we have absolutely no reason to be scared of snakes in the slightest. We actually have 3 species of snake in the UK that are native. We have probably the most famous one, the adder, which is the only venomous snake. We have the grass snake, which is our largest snake, and we also have the smooth snake, which is very, very rare, and it's only found far down south. This is, by the way, this is a corn snake. This is occasionally found out in the wild, but they're just escaped pets. This is the most popular pet snake to have. Dinky little thing, very, very beautiful. I find them absolutely fascinating, and that may be why, as I was earning my degree in geology, I actually ended up working as a zookeeper for 6 years, in fact, because, well, universities are not the cheapest things to try and go to, and I didn't inherit any great money, so I had to work and pay for it as I go. And so I worked as a zookeeper for, like I say, nearly 6 years. And as a result, I sort of, you rise through the ranks as you do in a job, and I ended up getting partially funded to do a zoology qualification, an academic qualification in zoology. So I have a nice rounded background. A lot of practical experience goes into being a zookeeper, as well as academic experience. You have to know your animal really well because you are trying to look after it. You're trying to make sure it's as comfortable as it can be. You're trying to replicate its natural environment the best that you can. So you have to understand how the creature works in order to be able to design their enclosures. So we had great fun playing with the animals and looking after them and getting to grips with snakes. So let's talk a little bit about snakes briefly and give you a background to their incredible design before we get into the question about venom. Here's a garter snake. This is a snake from the USA, and you can see he's sticking his tongue out at you. He's not being rude. Most of our audience today will probably know exactly what he's doing. He's smelling the air. Specifically, he actually uses the same thing we use to smell with, which is in reality our brains. What the snake is doing is he's sticking his tongue out, he's waving it about, and he's bringing it back in his mouth. Now, you notice that a snake has a forked tongue. It's very famous that they have forked tongues. I wonder how many of our audience has ever stopped to question, why do snakes have forked tongues? Most people have never thought of that, but it's actually very important to the snake. You see, when they bring their tongue back inside their mouth, they stick it in 2 little holes in the roof of their mouth. These little holes go directly to the back of the brain, to a special part of the brain called the Jacobson's organ, and they lick it off onto the Jacobson's organ. There's the diagram for you. There's the forked tongue. They bring it back in. They stick it up in the 2 little holes just here, side by side. It goes into the Jacobson's organ, which emits the signal to the brain. Now, the reason that they have a forked tongue is because one side of the fork, or one of the forks rather, is for one side of the snake's body. The other fork is for the other side of the snake's body. So they are picking up a 3D picture, if you like, and it is a visual picture of their surroundings using scent. Now, you and I have a Jacobson's organ. You and I use it in the same similar way when it comes to smelling. Many other animals have Jacobson's organs. They're not quite as sophisticated, if you want to call it that, as the snake's Jacobson's organ. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But when you and I smell, what we do is we take a great big deep sniff. The odor particles go into our nose, to the back of our nose, where receptor cells take the information about those odors and send the information to our brain, right? Now, the snake does it slightly differently. He actually captures those odors on his forked tongue. He brings it back into his mouth, and he will literally wipe those odors directly onto the Jacobson's organ. Now, as a result of that, the snake has got a remarkable sense of smell. In fact, the latest estimates is that snakes can actually pick up to month-old odors. In other words, if this hotel is a bit of a grotty hotel and I had a mouse that had run across the floor a month ago and I had a snake with me, it would be able to pick up the traces of that mouse. Now, you see, the snakes will do this in order to locate their prey, in order to locate their food. And it is an incredible sense of smell, far supersedes ours, far supersedes animals that we usually associate with having a good sense of smell, like a dog's. It just goes beyond anything that we can really comprehend. It is absolutely remarkable. All right. If you're squeamish, look away now. This is Whisper. Whisper's the snake, by the way, not the mouse. We don't name our mice when we feed them to our snakes. Whisper is a northern pine snake that I had the pleasure of looking after for many years before she sadly passed away. And you can see her there eating a mouse. Now, she's used her super sense of smell to find the mouse. These are bred mice, by the way. They're pre-killed and we have to feed them dead. So what you have to do is you have to dance them around to make them look alive, to try and mimic natural behaviors for the snake in captivity. But you can see how she's actually consuming that snake there. Now, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because I want to come up full screen so you can all see me. To put it into perspective, that rat is about that big. Okay, Whisper's head in total, her entire head is about that big. So there's the head, there's the mouse, there's the head, there's the mouse. Now, how on earth does Whisper actually manage to fit that entire rat or mouse into her mouth? And when I was working as a zookeeper and I would be doing the encounters with the snakes, and you'd have a big audience of people there, and I'd say, so how did this big snake fit a great big rat in its little mouth? And hands would go up over the room. And you know what the number one answer that I would get? Snakes dislocate their jaws. And I would have to say, I'm sorry, but snakes really do not dislocate their jaws in the slightest. And I have no idea where this myth came from. I was taught it when I was younger. I've met parents and teachers teaching their kids that this is it. I've even seen it read in books. I have no idea where it came from. It's got nothing to do with how a snake actually eats, because, well, I met a lady once who had had a motorbike accident and had actually dislocated her jaw. And it was not very good in the slightest. She couldn't move. It was all swollen up. It just doesn't work to dislocate your jaw and then relocate it every time you want to eat something. You see, snakes don't dislocate their jaws because they don't actually have jaws to dislocate. Here's a snake's skull there. This is a puff adder's skull. You can see his big venom fangs there. Now, at the back there, you can see I've pointed out a quadruped bone. Now, the quadruped bone is essentially a huge lever which allows the jaw to sort of stretch open really, really wide. You will also notice down here, let's get a marker on it for you so you can see. There's my laser pointer. You can also see down here, he doesn't have a chin. In fact, that chin is actually attached by a very stretchy ligament. So really, when these snakes are opening their mouth really wide, that is literally all they're doing. They are just opening their mouths really wide. Imagine it a little bit like this. A snake's jaw is two-part. It's connected by a quadruped bone at the back. So when they open their jaws, they open them out like this. They don't dislocate it. They're designed to be able to stretch open really, really wide. So it's a remarkable piece of evidence for design because, well, If a snake didn't have that ability, it simply wouldn't be able to survive because they cannot actually chew. Oops, let's turn this off for a second. There we go. What it does mean is that snakes can actually consume remarkably large things compared to their body size, or their body width at least, and certainly their head size. You can see here's one of our corn snakes, Zig, consuming a mouse there. Can you see how his skin stretches open really wide? Yeah, because not only do you need to have a jaw that can open really wide, you also need to have skin that can stretch open really wide. It's quite remarkable. And here's a large carpet python consuming a wallaby in Australia. That is some serious eating there. Of course, you do have to ask yourself, if this is really the case, I mean, have a look at how he's consuming this wallaby here. If you were to shove that quantity of food down your throat, would you be able to breathe? No. Okay, well, how is the carpet python breathing? Because on a large animal like this, it can take over an hour, sometimes several hours, to actually consume his prey and get it down him. So how is he breathing during this time? Any guesses? And, you know, I've been asking that question for nearly 10 years now, and I've only ever had the correct answer from an audience member once. And I like to point out, when an audience doesn't have a clue, that it's a good job that God designed the snake and you didn't, because you'd end up with a dead snake very quickly. The answer? There's a snake. He's giving you a cheeky grin. Can you see that hole? You see, you know, when you're doing electrics or you're doing plumbing, you always have an overflow pipe. You always have an extra loop of wire for the electricity to go through as a backup in case something goes wrong. Well, that's what this snake has been designed with. This is actually, you can see it a bit clearer there with the paperclip on a little corn snake. This is a special tube which actually runs down the side of the snake's throat. It's an extra tube. It goes over its back and then it reattaches to its lungs from the top. The reason it does it from the top is so that when that snake is actually eating, the pipe does not get squashed. So normally a snake will breathe through his nostrils or through his mouth, and that's connected in essentially the same way that our esophagus is connected. But this extra little pipe actually means that when that snake is consuming its food, it can stick its little pipe out the side of it and can continue breathing while he's consuming, as he's slowly pulling and crawling that prey into his mouth. Remarkable piece of evidence. And of course, you have to ask yourself, how did these incredibly complex organisms evolve perfectly at the correct time? You do realize that evolution can't answer that? And I haven't even spoken to you about the fact that once you've eaten that creature, I mean, if you were to consume that amount of food, you'd explode. The snake's body needs to be able to cope with that volume of food. Its liver will increase by almost 4 times. Its heart rate will go up 3 times. Its stomach will actually become over 40 times more active when it's in digestion. It's an incredible way of designing this creature in order to consume a huge volume of food. The point that we like to make over and over again, when it comes to designing things, when it comes to creating life, it's got nothing to do with time, but everything to do with the process. Get the process right, and it happens brilliantly. You see, time, the whole evolutionary idea is that given enough time, anything can happen. Hydrogen can turn into university professors. That really is the theory of evolution. But it's got nothing to do with time. It's got everything to do with the process. Time doesn't create, talent does. And if you're going to design, I mean, our designs, cars, planes, computers, they don't come anywhere near close to the design of a snake. If you want to design a snake, you need to have an incredible amount of talent. Okay, let's move on to the poison side of stuff and the venom side of stuff. One deadly bite, because snakes can have some pretty nasty bites. I mean, in Australia, I went there in 2018 and I was supposed to be there last year, but COVID put an end to that. And I'm looking forward to when I can get back out there because, well, they have a lot of snakes in Australia. In fact, they're the only country in the world where they have more venomous snakes than non-venomous. Of course, in England, we only have one venomous snake. And like I said earlier, you know, people in the UK, they really don't have any need to be scared of snakes because They're pretty rare. We are not in a brilliant climate for snakes, and we really don't have anything to fear, yet people in the UK seem to be terrified about it. However, if I go to Australia and give this talk, people are like, oh yeah, they're snakes. I'm happy to listen to it, even though they have a lot more to worry about when it comes to snakes. This is a rattlesnake from the USA, by the way. Look at those big sharp fangs, needle sharp, inject venom, kills you very, very quickly. Nasty things. Why would God create such a thing? Why would God create something with the ability to kill? Why would God create something that is there to really bring harm to creatures, bring harm to humans? There's the venom. You can see this snake. He's getting a bit grumpy and he's oozing, his fangs are oozing that venom out of himself, ready to inject it into a creature. You see, we need to actually ask ourselves some questions when we're dealing with this whole topic. And why did a good God make bad things? I mean, we're not going to get a chance today to go into things like, COVID or bacteria or viruses and so on and so forth. But let's ask ourselves some questions. Why would God actually create venom? Or did God even create venom? Is venom the result of the fall? The fall of mankind. Adam eats of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The world is cursed. Bad things start happening. Could venom have had a different use before the fall? Could it have got worse after the curse? Could venom have started really mild so it doesn't harm anything and then got worse as a result of the fall? And also, we need to ask ourselves, are there any vegetarian animals which are also venomous? Because this has been puzzled over by many different creation organizations and speakers for a lot of years, but there's been some really new discoveries that have come to light, which have really revolutionized the way that scientists view venom and also the use of venom. Here's some creationist ideas about venom. These are some ideas that I've heard over the years. They don't represent any particular organization or whatever. I've even thought of some of these in the past. These are things that I've picked up from different ideas, and they're all potentially valid, but we need to dig down a little bit and have a look. One idea is that God equipped snakes with venom to survive in the fallen world. So God gave them venom, but they had no need for it before the fall, but God equipped them with it in order to help them survive, because he knew, as God does foreknow, that man would sin, that the world would become cursed. Jesus was always plan A. It was not God going, oh no, man's messed up. What am I going to do now? I better send Jesus to die. It was always God's plan to come to earth and to die for sinners. He knew that this was going to happen. So in his creation, could he have created things in order to be able to survive in a fallen world, even though they didn't need those designs in the beginning? Another idea was that venom was created after the fall, that God, during the fall, as part of the curse, actually gave animals abilities that they didn't have before. Venom may be included in that. Another idea is that venom arose naturally after the fall, that perhaps it was already implanted in their genes somewhere, and that only arose through natural selection and through a necessity programmed to survive. Venom arose by itself, or it originally had a different purpose, perhaps. And another idea is that God actually designed snakes to kill. It's similar to the first idea, but it's that they always had the venom, they always had that genetic design to kill, perhaps, but God sort of supernaturally limited them before the world was cursed. These are all different ideas. There's probably many more about them that have been floating about. But like I say, some new research that has opened up about animals has really given us new ideas and new perspectives on the way that venom actually works. Here's the problem. Snakes are the ultimate killing machines. Sir David Attenborough, in his very good production, actually, of Life in Cold Blood. I remember watching that years back, and it's a really very well done production. The camera work is stunning, as so many of the BBC's David Attenborough's nature programs are. Of course, all of these nature programs do come from a particular perspective. That perspective is that of evolution, that snakes arose all by themselves from the goo all the way up through evolutionary history and developed venom in order to kill. And it's remarkable how many evolutionary assumptions have filtered into creationist thinking over the years, because it's been so ingrained to us from day one. It can really be difficult to actually step back and start with the Bible as our authority. Even if we say, yes, of course, the Bible's our authority, and I know I'm guilty of this as well, our life experiences can actually affect the way that we think. Here's the problem. According to the evolutionary philosophy, which is promoted by people like Sir David Attenborough, snakes are the ultimate killing machines. Snakes are designed to kill from an evolutionary perspective, or at least have evolved specifically in order to be able to kill. Here's our evolutionary picture. In the beginning, you have the Big Bang. Hydrogen all by itself came together to form molecules. Molecules all by themselves came together to form microbes. Microbes all by themselves came together to form monsters like the dinosaurs, onto mankind and beyond. We're continuing to evolve. From nature to nurture, it's an uphill climb the entire way, starting very simple and building upwards and doing anything that is necessary to survive. The solution? Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Step one of the solution to this is recognizing that in the beginning, everything was very good. In the beginning, everything had a good purpose. In the beginning, everything was specifically created for God's glory. Starting with this basis, ignoring the evolutionary assumptions and making sure that you actually have a biblical perspective. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created everything in perfection. Genesis chapter 1. We need to start with the Bible as our authority and move forward from there. Step one, in the beginning, everything was very good. And then it went downhill. Mankind sinned. Eve was deceived. Adam willfully ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And as a result, the world was cursed. As a result of man's sin, death entered the world, thorns and thistles entered the world, and the world began to go downhill. The world had changed from good to bad, and then beyond, including these things: thorns. You see our prickly, thorny plants that we have at Jurassic Ark? I hope you do realize that the Bible is not just a history of God's redemptive dealings with mankind, it's a history of the entire universe, including a history of thorns. Interesting. See these bromeliads? They're in the pineapple family. See their spiky leaves? Nasty things, great big sharp prickly things. I wonder how these actually came about, because you do realize that God, they came about as a result of man's sin, as there was a specific part of the curse that God gave to them. But scientifically, biologically, how do thorns actually form? Oh, by the way, as a brief little aside note, remember our site that we were digging up fossils from yesterday, our wonderful polystrate tree? Oh, poly means many, straight refers to the layers. This is a tree which cuts up through many layers. I wonder if that's evidence for a worldwide flood. But we're not talking about polystrate trees. But have a look at this wonderful fossil that we found there as well. Can you see our great big spiky thing here? Hey, me and John Mackay, our international director, have been having a little bit of a competition over the last few years to see how many different sites that we can find fossil thorns at. By the way, I've just equalized. This is my third site on the planet. John Mackay has found 3. We've found them in the UK. We found them in Australia. We found them in America, in Canada. I actually have the little fossil with me right here. Fossil thorns. There it is there. You do realize that thorns came onto the planet after Adam sinned as a result of mankind's sin. What that means is that these rocks which we were digging up, well, they're classed as Carboniferous. Carboniferous is supposed to be 318 million years old, according to secular science. You do realize that according to the Bible, we've just been digging out thorns out of this, fossil thorns out of this deposit. Therefore, according to the Bible, this is less than 10,000 years old. Because thorns only came onto the planet after mankind sinned, and these rocks are likely the result of Noah's flood. There's wonderful evidence that they're the result of Noah's flood. Pays to have a biblical perspective sometimes. But let's go back to the thorns. Look at these bromeliads here. Can you see how they're not the healthiest of plants? they've got white stripes on them. Those white stripes are the result of a mutation. A mutation is a deletion or a change or a mess up of your genome, of your genetic code, and as a result, this plant is degenerate. It's not evolving. It's changed, absolutely, but it's not evolving. It's going downhill. No longer can it actually make the same amount of sugar by photosynthesis because it's mutated. It's gone downhill. And as a result, it's got thorns. Are thorns? Well, you see these little spikes and prickles. Botanically and scientifically, there are sort of prickles or spikes, and there are thorns. They're two different separate things. Biblically, it doesn't matter. They're all just sharp, pointy things. But have a look at what's actually happened with this plant here. You see, in order to actually send water up to the leaves and to send the sugar that the leaves are producing back down into the plant, leaves have little tubes called xylem and phloem, and they're made of silica. Silica is the same stuff that glass is made out of, and they're harder than the leaf material. They're sharper than the leaf material because they're made out of glass. Okay, you have a mutation and your leaf begins to shrink backwards. And as a result of your leaf shrinking backwards, your silica, sharp, pointy bits are now sticking out of your plant. Hence, you have prickles. These prickles, this bad thing, came about as the result of a mutation, came about as naturally as a result of the curse. Alternatively, these are true thorns, if you like, and these are the result of another type of mutation, which has actually caused the plant to force out these sharp spikes out of it. Again, not a good thing. The result of degeneration. A plant has gone from no thorns to thorns as a result of the curse. It's a downhill spiral. I wonder if venom could have actually been produced in the same way. Well, let's move on and have a look at some different animals and try and get a bigger picture of venom. This is Clarice, by the way. Clarice is our red-green iguana. She was a wonderful, sweet little thing. You can see her on top of my hat there. She'd sit up there for hours as we were cleaning out the enclosure and sorting stuff out. Wonderful, sweet little iguana. She had a brother by the name of Hannibal. I didn't name him, by the way, but he was a nasty, vicious iguana. You see, earlier in his life, he had been caught by the tail. He didn't like being caught by the tail, and as a result, he had actually detached his tails, as iguanas can do, and run away in order to try and escape. And the poor person who'd grabbed hold of the tail had ended up with a wiggling tail in its hand. As a result, Hannibal didn't like humans, and quite understandably. Now, there's a little story here because as a zoo, we had to actually catch Hannibal every month, I think it was, and do a health check on him. It was part of the law now in the UK. You have to do health checks and so on and so forth. So we would go in with a suit of armor on, great big thick gauntlets, and we'd catch hold of Hannibal and he'd wiggle around and you'd have to hold him nice and tight until he actually was quiet enough to be able to do a proper health check on him. So I caught him one of these times and I handed him to my colleague who was holding on to him, and I was doing the health check, and I actually noticed that in the corner of his eye, he'd had a little bit of skin get stuck in it because iguanas shed their skin in patches, and it got caught in the corner of his eye. Now, if we didn't get that out, then he could potentially go blind. So I went in with my gauntlets and tried to pull that bit of skin off. Didn't work. All right. So I took my gauntlet off. Some of you can see where this is going now. Came over the top of his head, grabbed hold of that little flap of skin that was stuck in his eye and pulled it out. And at that split second, he whipped around and grabbed hold of my hand and held it tight. Now, iguanas have got serrated teeth. Iguanas have got serrated, backward-pointing teeth. It sunk into my flesh. It sunk into my ligaments. His head was about the size of my hand here. It grabbed hold of my hand in its entirety. Now, of course, we couldn't leave him hanging like that. We had to get him off of me somehow. My colleagues decided the first route to go would be to try and squirt some vinegar in the side of his mouth. That didn't work. I just had vinegar in my cuts. Ow, which was nothing compared to the chili sauce they then tried to use. I can honestly say that was some of the worst pain that I have ever had in my life. The end result was to get a sort of a metal rod, slide it in the side of his mouth, prise his mouth open. I then had to push my hand further into his mouth to unhook the teeth and then take it out. Because if I had just pulled it out, those teeth would have easily sliced through my tendons and ligaments. No issue whatsoever. They sunk well into the flesh. Okay, the reason I'm telling you this story is twofold. First of all, those teeth sunk very, very, very nicely into my flesh. There was no doubt about the strength of those teeth and how sharp those teeth were. They sunk easily into the flesh and would have easily sliced through my tendons. Okay, what's the point on that? Well, the first point is, oops, let me go. I've messed this up somewhere. There we go. The first point is iguanas are 100% vegetarian. And that's really important because sharp teeth give you absolutely no indication as to what an animal eats. It only tells you how an animal eats. If they have sharp serrated teeth, they slice through their food. If they have rounded pointed teeth, they stab their food like a crocodile. If they have flat teeth, they grind their food. The shape of the teeth only tells you how the animal eats, not what the animal eats. And like I said, iguana teeth easily slice through flesh, are serrated, are essentially meat eaters' teeth, but they eat plants. And they need these sharp teeth in order to be able to get tough old cabbage leaf that Boise is eating here, and be able to actually try and get through it. I know actually this isn't Boise. This is Hannibal, by the way. This is the one that bit me. So that's the first point. The second point that I'm telling you this is because, well, after I had had that iguana bite, obviously it was cut, it was bleeding, and so on and so forth. But it began to go a bit purpley, and it began to go a bit puffy. Now, for many, many years, keepers were being bitten by these creatures, and also by, this is why I had these pictures up here earlier. This, by the way, is a bearded dragon. I've got one as a pet. There you can see his big sharp teeth in there as well. And for years, people were being bitten by iguanas. They were being bitten by bearded dragons, and it was going sort of purpley and puffy. And people assumed that the reason for this was because, well, perhaps there were bacteria in the teeth, and it was the bacteria actually infecting the wound. However, in the last few years, and I am talking about the last 3 to 4 years, they have discovered something remarkable in both iguanas and in bearded dragons, and now many other lizards as well. They actually have venom sacs in their mouth, that when they bite, they actually inject venom automatically. And it's a very mild form of rattlesnake venom. It's found in both bearded dragons and in iguanas. It is not potent enough to kill a human being, but it's enough to make a reaction. It is potent enough to kill a small mammal like a rat or a guinea pig or something like that. So it's a pretty vicious piece of venom. However, iguanas are 100% vegetarian. Meat is actually very bad for them. And bearded dragons are about 75 to 80% vegetarian. And the meat that they do eat is almost exclusively invertebrates, little creepy crawly things. Okay. Here we have an iguana, a 100% vegetarian, and a bearded dragon, a 75, 80% vegetarian, both of them with relatively toxic venoms. What on earth are they actually using it for? Well, the reality is they're using it to digest their food before they swallow it down. I mean, let's ask this question: what did snakes eat in a very good world? You see, snakes have sharp teeth, venom, and heat sensors in order to find their prey and to catch their prey. What good is this for eating veg in a very good world? Venom and poison? Well, there's the viper's heat sensing pit. It can actually sense heat, which is useful if you're hunting animals. But of course, here's a little quote. Knowing when to slither underground to beat heat is a key survival skill for these cold-blooded creatures, and the researchers say that thermoregulation, not hunting, may be why the pit's involved. Of course, we don't believe in evolution, but it makes an interesting point. There are alternative uses for the heat sensing pit than just finding your prey. Perhaps the most important one is knowing when to avoid heat, when to come out for these cold-blooded animals. Sharp teeth and venom? While teeth grip and pierce food, they inject venom into the food. Venom is actually a mixture of protein and enzymes that break down food. Specifically, there are two types of toxins that snakes will use and animals like iguanas and bearded dragons use. You have a hemotoxin or you have a neurotoxin. Neurotoxin attacks your nervous system and paralyzes you. A hemotoxin actually attacks your blood. It coagulates your blood until it can no longer flow through your veins and you will die. Both of these work by digesting your body or pre-digesting your body. And it works just as well in plants. In fact, it turns out that bearded dragons, well, they live in the deserts. Iguanas live in the jungle. And many of the plants are tough and hard to eat. And by themselves, they're too fibrous to actually get most of the nutrients out. But the venom actually, when it mixes with the saliva and they're chomping their way through, actually begins to pre-digest their food in order to help them digest it fully when they're swallowing it down. And this is happening on 100% vegetarian animals. Why do it this way? Well, remember that snakes don't chew. When they're swallowing it down, especially plants, bearing in mind meat is actually fairly easy to digest. It's all of the amino acids are in a way that we can easily digest them. It's actually harder for our bodies to digest plants, even though we were originally created for eating plants. But bearing in mind, not only are we cursed and we are 6,000 years down the degeneration scale, so are plants. Right? Neither us nor plants are perfect anymore, and it's a struggle sometimes to actually digest them. But the same for snakes. Snakes don't actually chew. In order to be able to swallow and begin to digest those plants, they would need to actually be able to inject venom. In fact, you can actually go onto YouTube and find videos of snakes eating grapes and swallowing them whole. Venomous snakes eating grapes and plants. It is out there. It does exist. It's a remarkable way of thinking about it. But then the world changes. You need to actually put God's glasses on, make sure you're not viewing the world through Darwin's glasses, the idea that all creatures evolved in order to purely survive, rather put on God's glasses, which says that everything was created very good and everything was created for God's glory. Have a look at the real history of weather. How does this tie into it? Oh, well, it's important for recognizing the way that animals actually change, because change is real, and we'll discuss that as we go. You start off with, in the beginning, everything was pleasant, warm and cool, but not too cold, not too hot. I mean, Adam and Eve were walking around the garden naked, and they weren't getting sunburnt, and they weren't freezing to death. It was very good when God created. Then you come to the first mention of rain, certainly, but the biggest climate change event recorded in the Bible, and perhaps the first climate change event, the first real major climate change event, which was Noah's flood. And after Noah's flood, you find the first ever reference in the Bible to winter, summer, to springtime, to harvest, to cold, and to heat. The book of Job mentions ice and snow and hail from the north. Then you come to Abraham and you have drought and he has to seek refuge in Egypt. And then, of course, you know about the children of Israel and Joseph and the brothers who ended up in Egypt because of the drought. And then you find there are erratic climates all over the place. Not only has life gone downhill, weather has gone downhill as well, from very good to major climate change to up to down to up to down to up to down. And you end up with extremes, and you end up with places that are really difficult to survive in. As the world degraded, when there was not as much vegetables, not as much good vegetables, you end up having to catch prey as the food chain breaks down. You end up biting enemies. It's also interesting to note, as a side note, that we've discovered that many venomous snakes can choose when they inject. At least 25 to 50% bites are dry bites. That means they bite without actually injecting anything. And as a little interesting bit, it's often children. If you have a little child, a little human child, go up and start poking a dangerous snake around because they're curious and they haven't been taught any better, many cases have been recorded of the snake actually biting the child but not injecting any venom. Whereas if an adult goes and messes around with a snake, the snake bites, and almost every time it injects venom. It's interesting, isn't it? But it's also interesting because the Bible talks about dominion and about humans being dominion over animals. Interesting little points. However, if you're wearing Darwin's glasses, you will, of course, define evolution as change. You'll then call all change evolution. Then you will accept change in snake diet and behavior as proof of evolution, and therefore dismiss creation as unthinkable. However, it is a fact that there are many theories that disagree with everything in the Bible, but the facts never actually do. Make sure you're wearing the biblical glasses, make sure you're wearing God's glasses, and things begin to make a lot more sense. One deadly bite? No, it's one good design gone wrong. In the beginning, everything was very good, including Venom. You see, when you actually get down to start to study Venom, you just stand in awe at its complexity and its brilliant design. Venom is fantastically designed to digest things, whether that be you, whether that be a small animal, or whether that be a plant. It's brilliant at digesting stuff. Yeah, in the beginning, everything was very good, and snakes were designed to digest plants. They were designed with venom to digest plants. However, as a result of the fall, snakes are now using their venom, their good designed venom, in a wrong way. And what's interesting is, well, I mentioned earlier that Australia has more venomous snakes than non-venomous snakes. This is actually quite interesting because, well, Australia, a lot of it's pretty hard to survive in, isn't it? A lot of it's really difficult to survive in. Well, in a place where there aren't many plants, in a place where you have to rely on other designs in order to survive, like venom, you find that's where the most venomous snakes are. Downhill in climate, downhill in ecosystem means downhill in the way that you use your good design as well. The real deadly bite, of course, was the one that Adam took when the serpent deceived Eve. Adam willfully disobeyed, and as a result, snakes now are scared all over the or scared, or many people are scared of snakes all over the planet, and they are using their venom or their constriction ability in a very bad way. Well, we're beginning to run out of time, so I will briefly move on and deal very briefly with poisons. And we can throw it open to questions, and I expect there will be many more questions. Mention this as well. We've got our creationresearchstore.com with many of our resources, and specifically there are some very good resources called "Did a Good God Make Bad Bugs," which deals with things like COVID and Ebola and so on and so forth. As well as another one is "Did a Good God Make Bad Bugs?" and the real history of worms and germs. But if you use the code AIG21, you get 20% off across our store. We've got some fantastic new fossils up there as well, so do make the most of that. Our point really, if you want to have a concluding point, is this: who is your authority? Is it God's unchanging word, or is it man's evolving theories? You'll find this argument come up again and again and again. Well, if good God, why bad thing happen? Right? When reality is, you have to actually take a step back and say, no, in the beginning, everything was very good, and every design that we see is originally have a good purpose. The poison? Well, let's have a quick who am I quiz to really drive this point home. Who am I? My mouth is filled with razor-sharp serrated teeth. I use my sharp teeth for pulping broccoli and cabbage and any other greens that I can steal from the green turtle. My owners say they are having to hide pieces of fish inside celery sticks, hollowed out cucumbers, and between the leaves of lettuce to get me to eat them. But if they don't hide it well, I will ignore their meat and wait for the strictly vegetarian stuff. Yum. Who am I? I'm Florence, the vegetarian tropical nurse shark at the National Sea Life Centre, Birmingham, UK, reported in the Daily Mail a few years back. Yeah, this went around the zoo world as well. A strictly vegetarian tropical nurse shark who really didn't like eating meat in the slightest. Again, get your biblical perspective. In the beginning, everything was very good. God made the world very good. Good meant you didn't eat meat. Good meant that all creatures were originally vegetarian. Yeah, we need to start with our biblical perspective and move forward from there. All right, let's just skip over this and deal very, very quickly with poisons before we finish. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. But if God made a good world, why are some creatures poisonous? Let's deal with some definitions. Venomous, by the way, means you inject toxin. if it bites you and you die. Poisonous means it contains toxins. So if you eat it and you die, right? Examples: venomous snakes, venomous bees, venomous wasps, spiders, the platypus, shrews, Gila monsters, they all inject a toxin. Poisonous, like toads, poison frogs, beetles, salamanders, or fungi and many plants, you consume them and they're actually poisonous. So let's talk about poison arrow frogs, because these are a very famous one, and it also gives a very important reason as to why they get the venom. Poison dart frogs, of course, famously, you rub their backs with darts and you blow the darts, and it can kill many people and many animals just with a teeny tiny little bit of poison. How do frogs actually get their poison? Because they don't make it themselves, they actually eat ants and millipedes. Ants and millipedes, which contain a venom or contain a toxin which they use to break down organisms and break down leaf litter, the frogs actually eat the ants and the millipedes, and as a result, the frogs actually excrete the poison through their skin. Hang on a minute. These frogs were not originally poisonous. They have got their poison from what they actually eat. They then secrete the poison through their skin. Okay, question: would these frogs be poisonous in the very good world where all animals ate plants? Answer: no, they wouldn't, of course not. Also, would any creatures be eating frogs in order to get poisoned by them in a very good world? No, not in the slightest. You see, you need to actually make sure you're wearing the biblical glasses. Don't look at frogs with Darwin's glasses, which defines evolution as change, accepts all change in frogs as proof of evolution, and dismisses the creation of frogs as unthinkable. You actually need to make sure that you have got a biblical perspective. Again, a reminder, there are many theories that disagree with everything in the Bible, but the facts actually never do. Make sure you are actually dealing with these issues and dealing with these contradictions and dealing with these problems from a biblical perspective. Our final reminder of our websites, creationresearchuk.com and creationresearch.net.